Hi everyone, my name is Kenzie Dolan, and I apologize to anyone that was in the live Saturn Return Mastermind through Eventbrite. It wasn't showing the keynote, so I'm going to go ahead and re-record this. This will be on my YouTube where it will be visible for anybody that wants to learn about the Saturn return and what Saturn in Aries is. So, welcome to the Saturn Return Mastermind Take Two. We're showing Saturn that we're disciplined to getting this message out to those people that have a Saturn in Aries. So, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So, look, I have a PDF. You all can see it now. I can see it on my screen. So, welcome to the Saturn Return Mastermind. My name is Kenzie Dolan. I'm a certified professional astrologer, and tonight you're going to be learning the ins and outs of a Saturn return. With my Saturn return already under my belt, the first one, I am wiser than ever at 34, and I'm ready to teach those that are on deck, as I say, which are the Saturn and Aries generations. The Saturn and Pisces generations will pass off the baton to Saturn and Aries generations on Friday, the 13th at 7:12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Friday the 13th. It comes with Saturn and Aries. A little bit about me. My name is Kenzie Dolan. Like I said, I'm the owner of Ruby Jade Rituals. I offer high vibrational and introspective consultation services through the rituals like astrology, numerology, and tarot. I also offer EFT and hypnotherapy and oracle. The mission of my company is to guide, mentor, and teach people through life's ups and downs. Ultimately, I help people come home to themselves. And Ruby Jade Rituals is meant to be with people during every rite of passage: birth, adolescence, adulthood, marriage, aging, and even death. And this photo of me right here was me prior to the Saturn return. In fact, I remember when this photo was taken, it was in 2020. And I did start my Saturn return in 2020. And I think the first part, when Saturn was in Aquarius, it happened in March of 2020. And then it retrograded back into Capricorn. And then by December, it went back into Aquarius. And so this photo was taken in August of 2020. And it was right after I got laid off. And I would have to say that I think my Saturn return had a little bit to do with that. That job wasn't really in alignment with my soul's purpose. So let's talk about Saturn through the years. So, Saturn through the years, where are we currently? So, right now, we are still in Saturn and Pisces. Okay. So, with Saturn and Pisces, the reign has started from March 7th, 2023, up until May 24th, 2025, and then again in September 1st, 2025, up until February 13th, 2026. But Saturn has been in Pisces, before that, in the 1930s, in the 1960s, and in the 1990s. And if you were with me during the Saturn Return Mastermind for Pisces, we talked about two different bands, and we're going to be doing the exact same thing tonight. Now, the two different bands that we were talking about with Pisces in comparison to Aries, they're different. One is a water sign, one's a fire sign, and you'll hear that in the sounds of these artists' music. During Saturn Return Mastermind in Pisces, we focused on Nirvana and the Rolling Stones. And with some of the songs that both of those bands sing, I mean, very deep, reflective, um, lyrics that make you really think and see that, okay, there's a tightrope that we walk on, and one side is joy and the other side is grief. And at times we did, hear that in some of their songs. The tempos are a little bit slow at times, but then they ramp up. And remember, Pisces is a culmination of all 12 signs, so we got a little bit of everything with both of those bands. Now, there was a lot of escapism, a lot of addiction with both of these bands and some of the members in these bands. And that was very a part of their come up and their vibe. It was seen not only in the music, but reflective of the band members. Now we're moving back into Saturn and Aries, and Saturn and Aries first happened in May 24th, 2025, up until September 1st, 2025. And then it will be with us from February 13th, 2026 to April 12th, 2028. But Saturn has been in Aries before. It was in Aries in the late 1930s into 1940, in the late 1960s up until 1969, and then in the late 1990s up until 1999. And the two bands that we're going to be focusing on tonight, they're different. It's not boy bands, it's girl bands. It's bands that have a lot of confidence and fiery energy and empowerment and fearlessness, really. About being leaders, about being icons, about being confident. And you'll see that in both of these girl bands that I'm about to reveal. We're going to be turning up the heat. We're going to be spicing up our lives. And we're going to be talking about Saturn's pull on society. So tonight's theme is revolved around two groups, the Supremes and Spice Girls. And the thing that both of these bands have in common, other than being two well-known girl bands, is that they hit their peak with fame, and then afterwards, some of the members split to pursue solo careers when Saturn transitioned from Pisces to Aries. So both of these bands were formed around when Saturn was in Pisces. Now, the Supremes, they were the Primettes, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and that was even prior to Saturn in Pisces. But the Supremes really solidified when Saturn was in Pisces, and then they had their peak moment of fame during Saturn in Aries. And then quickly after that, Diana Ross split from the group to pursue her solo career. And we see that actually almost identically with Spice Girls. Three of the members in Spice Girls split right after they really peak and hit international success. In general, when we look at just these bands and we think about what they gave us, is they gave us girl power. They gave us this notion that no man is going to bring me down and that I'm going to stand up for myself. And it's a very empowering message. It's very like self-confidence. And remember, Aries does rule the first house in the chart, and the houses bring everything down to earth, and it's really about confidence. And both of these girl bands did that, and they helped women across the world find their inner fire. So let's first start with the Supremes. The Supremes hit peak fame in 1967 and 1969. They did form in 1959 with four members, and there was the Permets, and they were in that group until 1961. So if we go back to here, we'll see, okay, Saturn was in Pisces in 1964 to 1967. So they were formed prior to Saturn in Pisces. And it didn't work. It didn't work. If we think about it, okay, 3 years would be from 1961 to 1964 when Saturn goes into Pisces, 3 years, okay, so it would be really Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in Aquarius. It would really probably be more like Saturn in Capricorn at the very tail end. Didn't work. Didn't work. By 1962, when Saturn was in Aquarius, the fourth member changed and then later dropped out to leave the trio known as the Supremes. I find that interesting because Aquarius is all about change. And so they had a member that was in the group, and then they swapped her out for another person, and that she later dropped out, and they were left with the trio named the Supreme. So they not only changed a group member, but they changed the name. So this was happening when Saturn was in Aquarius. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the lead singer, and she's always been a part of the group, is Diana Ross, and she is an Aries actually. So it's funny because we'll talk more about this, but under the name of the Prometheus in 1959 and 19 up until 1961 when Saturn was in Capricorn, um, Saturn was squaring Diana's sun. So there wasn't really an opportunity for, you know, her to be seen as well as she was seen when Saturn was in Aries. Um, this is kind of a character building aspect, so maybe she didn't feel as strong as she did when Saturn was in Aries. So that's just some thoughts off to the side that maybe people that are a little bit more well versed in astrology would understand. But in general, the Motown Premier Group peaked from 1964 to 1967. So they started to peak when Saturn was in Pisces, but by the time Saturn moved into Aries, it was like there was a fire lit under this group, and the fire just expanded, and they just gained so much airtime. And the songs like Where Did Our Love Go, Baby Love, Come See About Me, Stop in the Name of Love, Back in My Arms Again. It was just hit after hit after hit after hit. And it's almost like once Saturn was in Aries, the success just wouldn't stop and it was very quick. And I do think that in general, a Saturn on a sun, because that's what was going on for Diana Ross. She's a sun in Aries, and Saturn was in Aries. It really might have put her place of authority to work. It put the way that she shines to work, and she just didn't stop because they were everywhere. I mean, like I look at some of the things that they did, and they were performing all the time. And they were really showing up. I mean, they became the most glamorous Motown group for women. And I think that is because they really got their rhythm when Saturn was in Pisces. And Saturn, you know, wherever Saturn is in the chart, it puts in the work. And Pisces is all about that glitz and that glamour and that whole Hollywood, you know, flair. And they were the most like chic, iconic group at that point in time. In 1967, when Saturn was in Aries, the band was renamed again to Diana Ross and the Supremes. So it started to show that there was a leader in the group when, most of the people knew that she was the lead singer, but they wanted to show that even through the name. So it was Diana Ross and the Supremes. And by 1969, Diana Ross announced her departure of the band. So you see Diana Ross leaves the Supremes. And I think this is an article from 1969. I think it's late 1969, like December. And then she launched her solo career by 1970. Saturn moves into Taurus, and the group had their final performance in 1970. And Saturn in Taurus, there's a lot of throat activation with Saturn and Taurus. But really fascinating group, an iconic group. I mean, I still listen to their music, and it's really interesting that this group, came up, really had a lot of success quick, and it was led by Sun in Aries, Diana Ross. But the thing about it is that their rise in fame happened so quickly, and that it was almost like, okay, within th within 3 years when they really were kind of at the peak, it was like you would think that they would keep going, but they kind of had a quick hiatus, a quick um, departure from each other. And that's the way that Aries works. It's very fast. It's very quick. The fire can go out quickly. It can burn strong, but it can go out quickly. So here's another band. And this band came up when Saturn was in Aries. It was just in the 90s, so 1996 to 1999. But once again, this British girl group formed in 1994, and when they formed, Saturn was in Pisces. And really, we can think about Pisces, and it's the culmination of all 12 signs. And if we look at this group, unlike the Supremes were very homogenous. They all looked alike, they all wore the same clothes. Um, there was this type of thing where, they were a group and you could tell because they wore the same clothes. And that's one part of, coming together. Like at the very end of the zodiac, we all come together. Pisces really pulls all 12 signs together. We could look at it that way, being homogeneous, but we could also look at it in a different way where the Spice Girls really represented that well, where all the members don't look alike. They're very different, they're very unique, and you can kind of look at it that, each of them, we needed a little bit of spice for this group to make it, for this group to really become what it became. And so in 1996, when Saturn is in Aries, they released their hit single Wannabe. And like Diana Ross and the Supremes, it was just a wildfire after that. This hit number one on the charts in 37 different countries. They were international success overnight, basically. Also in 1996, they released their debut album, Spice. It sold more than 23 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album of a female group in history. The year after, in 1997, they made their feature film, Spice World. I'm sure a lot of people watching remember that. That was iconic. The year after that, 1998, they go on tour. It became the highest grossing tour by a female group with 2.1 million attendees. But then in that same year, in 1998, Ginger Spice announces her departure from the group. And honestly, it came as a surprise because they were just doing so well. But remember, Aries is like lighting a match, and that match will go out eventually if we don't apply it to something like a bonfire or a candle or a torch. So, yeah, I mean, they were really hot at one point, just like the Supremes, and then there was this announcement of a departure by Ginger Spice. And then the year after, 1999, Baby Spice, Scary Spice, and Sporty Spice all released music as solo artists. So that is still Saturn and Aries. And then in 2000, Spice Girls entered a hiatus to concentrate on their solo careers. And it's so interesting because Pisces is about that culmination of all the 12 signs coming together, understanding the whole pie, the whole picture. We see that in these girl groups, right? They're coming together. They're saying sending a message. They're really like teaching us, right? And it's meant to be in a group because um, Saturn, or sorry, Pisces is the 12th house. It's above the horizon line. And it's a part of the chart where, we are working with other people. But once we cross that horizon sign and we get down into Aries house, which is the first house, it's all about the self. And we see that with both of these girl bands where they went from having success as a group to wanting to have success as a solo artist. Aries is all about me, and we see that. Isn't that interesting? I love that. Okay. And before I move on, want to point out that one of the members in Spice Girls is also an Aries sun, and that is Posh Spice. And even though she wasn't one of the Spices to go off and have a solo musical career, she really has shown the test of time where we have seen a lot of her in the news, just like Diana Ross. Like, she's probably the one Spice Girl that we still hear about to this day. And I just think it's so fascinating that we have two Aries suns in both of these groups. They are the powerhouses of the group, Diana Ross and Posh Spice Victoria Beckham. Really, really cool. The rest of the members in both Spice Girls and the Supremes are not Aries. I looked it up. So really fascinating that the two members of each group that we still hear about, the fire has not gone out on them, is Diana Ross and Posh. Find it interesting. Saturn is putting their Aries sun to work. Okay, so when does your Saturn return happen? Okay, so it happens about every 30 years. So just think about that. That's pretty monumental. It's not happening like every 12 years like a Jupiter return. Um, it's happening every 30 years, give or take. Saturn takes about 2.5 years to transit every sign. And so that means that you could experience three Saturn returns in a lifetime. So those that, were born in the 1960s, this would be your second Saturn return. While the people born in the 1990s, this is your first Saturn return. And what happens with this is that Saturn gets to try on each zodiac costume in your chart. And wherever Saturn is in your chart, it is doing some type of work. And so when it comes around to the exact degree and exact minute when you're born, it has spent time in all the other 12 signs. And there it has really done a SWOT analysis. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Where are your opportunities? Where are your threats? And when it gets to the same degree, same minute, which is the Saturn return, it is an opportunity to up-level your life, to really take a look at your blind spots, and to really commit to something that's more mature, more responsible, more refined. And this is the glyph for Saturn. So if you don't have um, a Saturn in Aries, you can look at your chart and you can kind of see what sign is Saturn in. People that have Saturn in cardinal signs like Aries, Aries is a cardinal sign, and my cardinal signs I like to say are my natural leaders and Aries is definitely a leader. We see that in both of these girl bands and both of these women that, are still very iconic today. Um, but if Saturn is either in Libra or Capricorn or Cancer, the other cardinal signs, when Saturn is in Aries, there'll be a Saturn opposition if you have Saturn in Libra, or there'll be a Saturn square if you have a Saturn in Capricorn or a Saturn in Cancer. And I talked about when Diana Ross was in the Primettes, she was going through her Saturn square. Well, I don't know if she has Saturn in um, Aries, but she definitely has a sun in Aries, and Saturn at the time was in Capricorn when the permits were going on, so there was a square to her sun. And so that is a challenging aspect, whether it's your sun or it's your actual Saturn. But the Saturn square is when Saturn in Aries will be squaring Saturn in Capricorn or Saturn in Cancer. And the Saturn opposition is when Saturn will be opposing Saturn in Libra. For those that have Saturn in fellow fire signs like Sagittarius or Leo, there's going to be a trine that's going to be going on, so it's going to be more supportive. For those that have Saturn in Aquarius or Saturn in Gemini, there's going to be a sextile, more again, a supporting aspect. So a lot of things to think about when Saturn is in Aries and how you can apply it to your chart. But remember, look at for this glyph, it looks like a cup that is flipped upside down where no water can enter. It's about constriction. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Saturn is, what Saturn is not. Okay, Saturn is not about expansion. Saturn is not about rebellion. Saturn sits in between Jupiter, which wants to expand, and Uranus, which wants to rebel. And Saturn is in between both of those planets for a reason, and it's meant to be the Lord of Karma, the keeper of time, the discipliner, the law and order, the authority figure. We can think of Saturn like the strict dad in high school. And Saturn is all about discipline and responsibility, maturity, rules, upleveling, lessons, hard truths, realizations, endurance. And I got two pictures here, and one of them says, "Are you who you want to be?" Because that is what Saturn is going to be asking you during your Saturn return. Is this is this the group that you really want to be spending your time with? Is this the job that you really want to be working? Is this the person that you really want to spend the rest of your life with? Is this the place that you actually want to live in your old age? And the other one says you can easily return to the past, but no one is there anymore. And that one really speaks to the fact that the Saturn return, you can kind of think of it like a bridge. And at one end of the bridge, we have adolescence, and this is for the people born in 1990. And we have adulthood. And your job is to ride your bike across that bridge while it's on fire. So you got to get to one end, and the end that you want to get to is the adulthood because a Saturn return is a true marker of adulthood in the eyes of an astrologer. In fact, I don't really look at somebody as an adult until they have gone through their first Saturn return because there is so much that you learn during a Saturn return. So Saturn is the edge of known, and the placement in the chart shows where resources have to be hoarded to conserve energy, where traditions have to be adhered to, where the status quo should be upheld, and what responsibilities need to be taken seriously. It gives structure and form in everyday existence. Saturn also represents the point at which limitations become unacceptable and restrictions need to be breached. There might be too much censorship. You could be a person that condemns yourself way too much. This is where inner discipline is formed and the soul can grow, where karma has to be transcended, where responsibility has to be taken for oneself. If resilience is not developed, something out there is is likely to impose discipline and restriction. Saturn also rules bureaucracy, sorry, and government. Um, there's a lot to say about Saturn. A lot to say. But authority figures of all kinds pertain to Saturn. And really, at the end of the day, it is the way shower. So moving on, what does a Saturn return feel like? Well, it can feel like a lot. There can be ups and downs, but if you're putting in the work, it isn't that bad. And actually, at times, it's very, very rewarding. If you're not putting in the work, like I said earlier, if resilience is not developed, something out there is likely to impose discipline and restriction. You can come up to some roadblocks. So sometimes it feels like ripping off a band-aid. But the good thing with that, and Aries knows this very, very well, ripping off a band-aid, it's going to be over soon. You just kind of had to breathe through it. It sometimes feels like that wise whisper you should listen to. And remember, Saturn is that strict dad in high school that we found annoying, but thank God for that because that person kept us out of trouble, and without them, we would have been dead in a ditch. Now, during a Saturn return, if you fuck around, you are gonna find out. And excuse my French, but I definitely did this during my Saturn return. I stayed in a relationship that I didn't want to be in, and I was confronted with a lot of stuff because a Saturn return can be in your face. And what happened was during my Saturn return, I had an opportunity to leave my relationship. I did not do it. And then when Pluto was on top of my Saturn, it was like all the lessons that I should have done in my Saturn return were right in front of my face. It was very confronting. There was a lot of stuff that happened. And luckily, I got out of that relationship during Saturn's time in Pisces. The illusion was broken. Pisces rules illusion. Saturn constricts whatever it touches. And I got out. So thank God for that transit. It was a time when I drew a line in the sand, and you will do the same. Enough is enough. Maybe you'll have to make some sharp turns, and that's okay. There's really no way out, there is no exit. If you need to stop and understand like where your next turn is going to be, that's totally fine. But just remember, you are one step closer to your authenticity during a Saturn return. So it's hard, but it is so worth it. All right, so Saturn and Aries generation is going to be leading this, but all of us are going to learn a thing or two while Saturn is in Aries. So one thing I want to say is that when Saturn is in Aries, there's this thing called essential dignities and debilities. And when Saturn is in Aries, there is a debility. Saturn is in fall when in Aries, and this is Hellenistic astrology. And what that means is that the planet needs to fall down in order to learn a lesson. Okay, Saturn is all about handing out lessons. So, in a way, I'm not that concerned, but I do want you to think about that Saturn is patient, whereas Aries is impatient. Okay? So, that's where the disconnect can be. Saturn lacks perseverance, sorry, excuse me, let me go back. Aries lacks perseverance, where Saturn thrives with it. Aries wants everything now, where Saturn understands that good things take time. So it's important to not get burnt out during this transit. And that's why I have all this fire on the screen. So it's just really important to understand that this is a long journey. It's 2.5 years. And so there's some things on this slide that will help you get through this transit. In general, this transit is about standing up for yourself. It's about stepping into your power. So to work with the crystal for Saturn, it's onyx and it's a black crystal. And Saturn does rule the shadow side of a personality. And when we look at Saturn in the sky, we do see there is an eye at the top of it. It's an evil eye. And when we hear that, we're like, "Oh God, okay. I don't want the evil eye on me." But there could be a part of you that you're not 100% addressing, and it needs a little bit of maturation. And so the evil eye kind of helps show that there's parts of this journey in the Saturn return that can be hard. Um, there might be parts of you that get you the evil eye. Uh, but then we can also look at the evil eye as on top of Saturn as it's protecting you from um, more evil. It's saying, hey, we got to look at these parts of ourselves and we got to work on them. We got to put the work in so we can prevent the evil eye from coming in more and more, like let's work on some of this stuff. So just think about that. Typically, everything is started in the dark, and so working with a crystal like onyx, which is all black, it kind of blacks out everything to make it where we can start from scratch, um, where the light can come in. Now, the crystal for Aries is carnelian, and it's red. It's about passion and vigor and erotica. And so even just wearing colors like black or red would be ways to, incorporate both of these energies into your Saturn return. We're looking for practical rituals. I love to teach people really practical ways to incorporate astrology into their everyday. So the next thing to learn about is Aries rules the face and the head, and the adrenal and suprarenal glands in the body. I hope that is correct. I know what the adrenal glands do. The suprarenal, I'm going to look that up to kind of educate you all. Okay, these are glands that are above the kidneys, and they produce hormones that regulate your metabolism, immune system, blood pressure, response to stress, and other essential functions. So this is about managing stress and headaches and migraines. So maybe you're a person who pushes through migraines or headaches or stress, but when Saturn is in Aries, it's going to be teaching you that you can no longer doing that. You can no longer do that. You are pushing your body to a point of exhaustion where sometimes you can't fully recover, and we don't want that. We don't want to burn out, remember? We want to keep that candle lit all the way through Saturn's transit in Aries. It's from 2026 to 2028. We gotta like conserve our energy. And that's what Saturn teaches us. So we need to do things to take care of our bodies. Working with the element of fire, we need to sweat it out. And when we sweat it out, we need to rehydrate. This is a fire sign. There isn't a lot of water with this. So we do need to make sure that we're bringing the other elements in, you know? So two things that you can do during Saturday and Aries is you can come up with a sauna ritual or you can come up with a workout routine. Another thing that we all need to do when Saturn is in Aries is we need to learn how to STOP. Stop in the name of law, love, not law, like Diana Ross and the Supremes sing. And stop right now. Thank you very much. I need somebody with a human touch. Hey, you, always on the run. Gotta slow down, baby. Gotta have some fun. Like Spice Girls sing. We all need to learn how to stop. Because Aries at times does come in hot, and we know that can scare people off. And as much as we all want to be scary spice, it's good to learn how to stop, to temper that anger. So we're gonna all learn how to do that. Um, it is going to, hold natural impulses in check, Saturn and Aries, and at times this will be frustrating. But as long as we stay disciplined, that will generate motivation to keep on going. Um, people with Saturn and Aries sometimes have a tendency to attack first because they are fearful of attacks. So learning to stop this habit is going to be a part of the Saturn return in Aries. There could be a little bit of a shyness or a stiffness or an awkwardness with Saturn and Aries individuals. But remember, this is going to teach us about confidence, just like Spice Girls and the Supremes taught us. It's important to also limit your screen and sedentary time. You need to release pent-up energy. You have to let go of the anger. So healthy, high-intensity outlets over impulsive outbursts. Turn up the music. Aries likes to crank the volume. So definitely do that. Dancing is great. And just we need to get acquainted with what is burning inside of ourselves. So if you're unsure of what is burning inside of yourself, use a scrying ritual. Stare directly into a flame. It will help you. Get around a fire. And when you do that, when you do the scrying ritual, you want to channel your fire. That way you can find the burning desires. That way you can answer the question, are you who you really want to be? And lastly, we all need to befriend that innate, primal, raw warrior inside of ourselves. That is going to teach us how to be confident. And it's also going to teach us to fight for what is right because Aries is a warrior. And we shouldn't, the goal is to be fighting for things that are responsible, are mature, exactly what Saturn wants. Okay, so I really appreciate everybody tuning in to the Saturn Return Mastermind. Come back to this when you need support. Reach out if you want to learn more about your natal Saturn. And I'll give you one thing before I end. If you hear any of the songs like Heat Wave from the Supremes or Spice Up Your Life from Spice Girls, think of it like a sign from Saturn that you are on the right track, that you are doing the work, and that Saturn sees that you are showing up. All right, I'll see you next time. Take care.